Welcome to Implement This with Microsoft Business Solutions MVP Britta Rexted and co-host Matthew C. Anderson, where we have an insider's discussion around the things we consider when implementing Dynamics 365. This episode is sponsored by Mapalytics by Enogic, which is a leading certified for Microsoft Dynamics 365 geoanalytical mapping app. Mapalytics empowers users across verticals with the power of geographical data visualization, optimized routing, appointment planning, proximity search, heat maps, and territory management to drive better sales, improve business processes, and engage the right customers at the right time. Enogic is a leading Microsoft Gold Dynamics CRM ISV, delivering best-in-class Microsoft Dynamics 365 solutions through unparalleled offerings of services and add-ons to help organizations increase productivity, streamline business processes, and build better relationships. And now, on with the show. So I forget how we actually started this podcast off the last time, so I'll start with a simple, hi Britta, how are you?
Good, how are you, Matt?
I'm doing okay. I'm excited to be jumping into another episode of this. Felt like some really good energy, at least in the room, and we'll see how the world reacts.
Yeah. Well, at least we had fun.
But there was something that you'd brought up as we were going through kind of that last episode where we were talking about different ways to update records in bulk. And, you know, just to kind of reiterate some of those, I mean, we had, you know, the bulk edit, immersive Excel. We talked about the, you know, third-party options that are available through XRM Toolbox and that kind of thing. And there was one specifically you said, maybe we can talk about that more in a future episode. Here we are. And of course, that is the Dynamics Editable Grid.
That's where I have to show my cards and admit that I don't actually know that much about editable grids. And it's kind of embarrassing as an MVP because the belief is that we know everything and we do not at all. We're just like everybody else. We have day jobs and personal lives and we're swamped and there's just so much to learn. And the platform is growing so fast that you just can't know it all anymore. So we've made peace with the fact we can't know it all, and even have had a lot of conversations internally within the MVP group of dividing and conquering and making sure that we have experts speaking on all these topics and that people kind of find their pet features and learn them really well, but it's just so big we can't learn it all anymore. Yeah. And so in an effort to show just kind of some transparency, I actually don't know editable grids all that well. I stood up and cheered for them when they were announced. I've tweeted about them. I've been really excited and I've like snooped on people's screens when they're up and you know, followed along PowerPoint presentations, but I actually haven't worked on a project yet where I've gotten to use them. And part of that is just the versions of CRM that the projects I'm working on are on, and that's a natural thing. We just don't get to learn newest features if we're not on the newest, greatest, latest version of CRM. I'm really excited to learn about it today. Yeah, well, I'm not going to herald myself as the all-knowing geek of everything editable grids, but we do use them internally. I helped us launch that within my organization, and I've also worked on it with a couple of clients at this point. So I've seen some of the ins and outs of, you know, what kind of goes beyond that marketing level capability of the editable grids. So yeah, let's get to it. Awesome. Do you want to start out with any specific questions? I think as a general question, when you're talking through this, what kind of things does the editable grid find itself as a really good fit for? Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, there's a few things, you know, as we commented on previously, people have wanted editable grids in Dynamics for so long. Forever. And now that they're here, it's kind of like, oh yeah, well, we can just use an editable grid for that. And there is some nuance to maybe where they are something that's a particularly good fit or a better fit than some of the other options that are available that we chatted about. So, you know, one is when you don't need to kind of copy and paste down an entire column. You are going to be editing each individual or each value individually. So if it's an update that would be made that requires that individual attention, you want to focus people and have them think about what they're putting in for the update on each record, that's going to be a really good fit for that. Another one is it works
both in the web as well as in the mobile client as well as in the tablet client.
Nice.
So if you need to be able to have that kind of grid-based editing and you don't want to count on the fact that, either an ISV product is going to work with that, or, somebody has Excel on their iPad and are they, heaven forbid, going to try to upload that? Anyway, so it works on a mobile device, which is really nice, especially when you consider people who are in the field. They're trying to look through and update a few different things out of a list. That proverbial salesperson trying to update their forecast right before a call, but they happen to be in the back of a cab.
Yeah.
So another good thing as far as evaluating fit is if you want people to be able to interact with that grid either on a form or in one of the main list views inside of Dynamics. It's supported in both of those places. So you're not just restricted to it being something on a form or some sort of custom place to go for that entity. If you just were to choose accounts from your list of entities, you can use the editable grid right in that main kind of view of the records that you're reviewing there. Mm-hmm. So yeah, those are a few of the things as I consider it. What's a good fit? Maybe not as good of a fit is if you're having people who are trying to do something formula based. You are having to type the actual value in there. So that's one where people would be entering in that actual data and either doing calculations in their head or that kind of thing. There are ways to as I'm sure we'll get into here in a little bit, but interact with that data and have some automation happen as a result of what they're putting in. Mm-hmm. But it is still something where an actual human being is going to have to think about what they're putting into that field.
Yeah. And I think there's probably some extent of just not wanting to overwhelm people, right? From a user adoption standpoint, you're helping them because they don't have to open each individual record, mm-hmm. change one field and then close it, save and close, and then open the next record. But there's probably a boundary there where you have too many fields, too mm-hmm. many things to edit, too many things you might be expecting the user to do where they get overwhelmed and they don't use it anyway. What is kind of that point that you've seen so far?
Yeah, and so for the use cases where we've put it into place, it's been very targeted in what types of fields that they're updating. And also there are some things you take for granted when you have a form open in front of you. You can do better things with how fields are grouped on the page, and kind of there are these clues that you have as a user when you see data laid out in a certain way that you just can't quite replicate mm-hmm. in a grid quite that same way. Yeah. So when you think of some of that end user actually sitting down and using it in true reality, mm-hmm. those are some of the things that you want to consider as well.
Yeah. I like the user adoption potential of bugging people with nearly complete data. Mm-hmm. I found back at my very first CRM project, my favorite hack was using mail merge, and we would spit out like what someone needed to walk into a meeting, all mm-hmm. the data they would want to have. We weren't using any kind of mobile technology then. It was entirely manual. Yeah. So I'd spit it out. And I knew our data wasn't complete. There were facts in there they had in their head because mm-hmm. they've known this client for 30 years, but it's not in the CRM. And I want it in the CRM. And the longer they've known the client, statistically, the harder of a CRM user they were to get to use it and put the data in. Yeah. And so my workaround for that is I would make sure their assistant handed them the mail merge that was nearly complete. And it would drive them nuts that the birthday was missing. Or like there'd be some fact, like the daughter's name or something that I knew they wanted, but they had never given me. And what we found happened in almost every case is the assistant would get back the sheet of paper with chicken scratch notes all over it. That's data. I want that data. And so I always befriend the assistants, by the way. They're like your best user adoption advocate. Always befriend the assistants every time. But they would help me and they'd get that data in there. And so that was my best sneaky way to get data out, is it was just slightly irritating. It was cool because they go, oh, wow, CRM did so much of my prep work for me for this meeting. Oh, how do we not have a birthday?
Yeah.
Ooh, There we go.
Well, and that having that capability of the editable grid, I mean, half the time, they see that the birthday is missing. They double click to open the form, and then they're searching around on the form for where that birthday field.
And they forget what they were doing.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So it's kind of the same thing where you can create these little holes where it's nearly complete. You always. I'm never saying you restrict the data. Please put all the data you have in there. But we all know that there's data in our sales guys' heads that they're not going to give us because they're not going to think to give it to us, or for whatever reason they're distracted. And so you can just slightly irritate people, and then they go, "Oh, I have that information. The state is Minnesota," and then they fill it in. I love editable grids for that. It's kind of the modern hack. It's the iPad-friendly hack on my old mail merge trick.
Yeah.
The psychology still holds up, though. I'm excited to try it. I haven't gotten to try editable grids, but I think it'll work.
Yeah.
Seems like it'd be fun. I like irritating people just a little bit. It's a user adoption strategy that's not quite so much fun to publicize. How to annoy your users just enough to get them to use stuff.
That sounds like a Tumblr.
Yeah. That'd be fun.
Do you want to tee up a question that'll let me go with the stuff you learn as you start working with them?
Yes. Where?
So we're still. Where is it? Yeah.
Okay. Great. Yep. Alrighty. So let's. Good energy. For post. What do you need to segue back in?
What do you mean?
Do we just go from a pause? And
I think we just go from the pause.
Okay.
Yeah. Should we do the clap?
So Matt, I always feel like I don't know how a tool works until I know where it doesn't work. And that just might be me being snobby again. But I like to know where my pitfalls are going to be potentially if I just assume that every field in the whole system is going to work, which I know from past experience in other projects not using editable grids. There's never a case that every single field in CRM works the way they're not all equal. Yeah, they're great and they have their own nuances, but they're never all equal in something like this.
Yeah, I mean that's very fair, and there's definitely some nuance to it and some surprises that I know we ran into in implementing this. So there are a couple of areas in particular. One is anything that's a composite field. Think of the full name field where it's first name and last name, or the address composite field where it's it's pulling together multiple pieces into that single field. Those don't kind of expand out for you to update each of the component parts.
So if I put the full name field in the editable grid, what do I get?
So you get the read-only value of what the full name is.
Got it. So if I want first name, last name editable, I need to put a first name field and a last name field. I should not put the full name field.
Exactly. If you want people to be editing those, which
maybe I don't.
On the flip side, maybe you don't. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe I don't want to make it easy to make that change. Okay.
Yeah. So another one is the customer field type, that special field type that's newer to the Dynamics platform, at least from a configuration person's standpoint, being able to choose either an account or a contact. We've seen that on some of the out-of-the-box fields from Microsoft in the past, specifically on opportunity is a really good example of that. Parent customer is a good example of that as well.
Now we're stuck with it in cases, which is kind of annoying.
Yeah.
Sometimes. It depends how creatively you use cases in your implementation. If you use them really creatively, sometimes the customer field is already on your bad list. Can be a little bit annoying.
Yeah.
So are there other composite fields? I'm trying to think of what else. I mean, names and addresses are really obvious. What if my developers hacked a composite field for me?
So that's a good question. It'll probably depend on what and how they actually hacked it. So if there is something that they're doing with, say, scripting in a form that's going to combine those fields together, there is the ability to hook in using JScript still for those developer types to be able to kind of make that happen in your grid as well.
Okay.
You would have to have all of the appropriate fields available if it's, kind of pushing those together into a manual composite field like that. So there is some capability there, but it's not just going to carry directly over. If it's something that's being done with plugins or something like that after the fact, once it's saved, you're going to see that kind of flow through as you would expect it to.
Okay, so it's actually pretty simple in that you're updating the source field, and then you may have code, you may be using something else to, something as simple as the first name, last name, you're automatically getting that that composite of your full name. So actually it's kind of nice as a non-developer to know I'm driving to the source. I want my users to update the source fields, and then whatever automation we've already built into compositing things is going to happen because the source is right.
Yeah, and so we do have things like business rules in Dynamics. Those are something that can be enabled to work with editable grids as well.
Nice.
As you are configuring them for the first time, when you enable an entity and start adding that editable grid capability, there's an additional tab in the configuration window on the entity, kind of the main entity metadata screen. So you get one where you can configure kind of a number of these different things around that specific editable grid and some of the behavior that grid will have there, bringing in things like scripting, business rules, and that sort of thing.
Okay. What else isn't what I would think it would be?
So, a couple different things. One of the bigger ones there is when it comes to adding lookups or how the lookup field behavior works. In the configuration of lookups on a form, it's very second nature to people who have been using the admin capabilities in Dynamics. You kind of know how that looks and feels. There's a different nuance to it in editable grids in how you set that up, and you choose the behavior of when you hit a lookup, what are the potential values that are going to show, the pre-filtering capability of what a lookup looks like and what's going to show for someone, and whether they have the capability to kind of pull off those filters, similar as what you would have in a form. There's a little bit different of a nuance to that, and you can have a different. It is actually a deeper level of control than what you have inside of forms. But with that great power comes a great responsibility, because you can make the user experience a little more difficult there. So, I would suggest planning some extra time for testing that out, getting feedback from people of, does this work? Is it behaving the way you expect it to from a lookup perspective?
Okay. Do I have to set it up twice? If I'm going to pre-filter my lookups on my form, do I have to do work again to filter the lookups on my editable grid for the same thing?
Yes, you do.
Okay.
Yep.
Alrighty. Well, nice that you get the control. Good reminder to go in, because that's the thing, is we're so used to kind of write once, deploy everywhere. This is not one of those things.
Yeah, and that's definitely as you're looking at that, the editable grid is its own configurable component. It is separate from each of the forms that you're doing. You can use similar design patterns, but it is going to be an extra step, an extra place if you have editable grids enabled for that specific entity.
Okay, so it helps us think of it as separate. In so many of the simpler things, I make fields, I put them on a form, I go on with my life. It's that simple. And so nice to have. Love the idea of having this on mobile, because it's such a big win for mobile. But you really do have to separate it in your mind. Otherwise, your old habits that have really been safe since at least 2011 don't apply here.
Well, and speaking of old habits and configuring in a form, one of the things that's definitely different and definitely a hassle is when you configure a form and you set a field as read-only, and you can kind of keep in the back of your mind, so that's a read-only field. My users aren't going to be able to make changes to that. Well, now if you add that that field that was read-only in your form into an editable grid, it's not read-only anymore. That is...
What?
Yeah, so...
Tire screech. Okay. Back up. Okay, so if I have a read-only field on my form, all my forms, let's just pretend it's always read-only because it really, really has to be. Editable Grids does not have my back on this.
So it can, and it depends on how you're achieving that read-only field. If the only way you're doing that read-only capability is by setting the properties of that field in the form to read-only, you're right. That's not going to carry over to the editable grid.
Okay.
Now, on the flip side, a few versions of CRM ago, Microsoft opened up, I think it was in 2015, Microsoft opened up the ability to set field-level security permissions on out-of-the-box fields in addition to custom fields that you've added.
Yeah.
So if you're using something like field-level security to be able to manage what you allow people to edit or not edit for some of those kind of business-critical fields, that field-level security will carry over into the editable grid as well.
Okay, so that is good to know. I helps to bring some confidence back that field level security is everything I believe it to be still, that it's not messed with here. Because if you're bringing in field level security, it's a level of hassle it takes. If you're bringing in field level security, you need field level security. It's a social security number. It's something that cannot get away.
Yeah, and I mean, there are other ways to be able to manage some of that. You can use, scripting, as I'd mentioned before, to try to be creative in the ways that you're achieving that. But there, especially on some of those early times when I started using the editable grid, I just took it for granted that, oh yeah, I need this piece of information here so they can see it. They can identify the record that they're looking for. But then I realized, oh shoot, but they can actually change that from there now. So it was definitely a shift.
So I've always, just out of laziness, I've kind of lumped read-only, marking a field as read-only, and selectively marking as read-only through a business rule as the same thing. I know they're not really the same thing, but in my life they always have been, so I haven't spent a lot of time making the distinction. Sometimes I like conditionally locking a field as read-only in a business rule, so I tend to do that unless it's just always read-only. Where does that fall in this editable grids piece?
Yeah, so business rules are something that can be enabled within an editable grid. I mean, anytime you create a business rule, you have to look at the scope with which that business rule is going to be applied. So that's definitely something to keep in mind there. And, best practice on it, if you really truly don't want somebody, editing a field, you do want to look at something like a field level security before using either script or business rules or
if it depends. It's kind of how bad will it be if you get it wrong.
Yeah, well, and it's one of those things where it's not as though editable grids is the first place that comes up. I mean, you look at something like open in Excel Online or immersive Excel. If you have a field out there that same way, you've been able to edit those fields even if on the form they were read-only. It's just, it is much more front and center when you are looking at the field in that grid.
I've always handled that more with what users do I trust with what security roles, not how do I do my UI design. Yeah. It's always been a security conversation for me, not a UI conversation. Yep. And now it's both, which is better. It's better to look at both. I just haven't had to. Yeah. So it's a little upsetting, but good. I mean, I'm excited. I think there's enough value, but it is really nice to know what the trade-offs are.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes those are things where, you may want to ask yourself the question, or if you're working with a client, ask yourself the question of, is the reason we have this as read-only because we truly need to stop someone from updating it? Or, if there were the possibility that they could update it, assuming good training and we don't have somebody doing something malicious, that it would be okay for them to potentially change that. Yeah. I find I have conversations around kind of that trust of the individuals and, asking the question of, why are we locking this down?
Yeah.
And that seems to be a question where I've had to ask it more and more and more over the course of the last few years as we've gotten some more fine-grained control over these different configuration capabilities and dynamics.
Absolutely. I think it really varies industry to industry. In finance, especially if they're regulated by FINRA, you're going to see really, really, really intense where no one in IT is making the decision that is a read-only field. Yeah. An auditor 2 years ago made the decision that is now a read-only field. It's just so super, super tight versus, you might find in a nonprofit that it's really the term read-only is comforting to the person asking the question. It doesn't mean that they need it. And sometimes it's having a better business analysis conversation about what it is we're trying to accomplish versus appeasing a regulator that no one can change that field. Yeah. But in that case, if you're so regulated in the read-only bit, it's probably field level security. Mm-hmm. If it's that important, then maybe field level security is more the way you need to go anyway. Mm-hmm. I guess it's all what is a liability if someone accidentally does it, and that is different for every. It can be different entity to entity. It's definitely different implementation to implementation.
Yep, 100%. So, moving back, I feel like I took us down a bit of a rat hole on some of the read-only stuff, but it is really,
really
kind of an important admin note there. Another admin note that I'd like to bring up is that while this does work in forms as well as in regular lists in CRM, it is not supported on dashboards. Oh. So if you are looking at, say, having a dashboard with several lists on it, the editable grid component is not supported in that.
Okay. Good to know. So it's the thing when you're dieting, when they show you the list of foods you can no longer eat, and then you panic, and you're like, but I have to eat something. So where can I put it? Just to backtrack. I can't put it on dashboards. Where else can I put it?
So you can put it as a subgrid on a form. So I'm looking at my account form, and I have
create or just regular form.
I actually don't know the answer to that question. Okay. I haven't tried adding it.
My gut says no.
Probably not, because the quick create, it hasn't actually saved the record yet. And how does it have associated records until it's been saved? That
makes sense. So my gut instinct would be no on that. Yeah, I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, it hasn't come up.
Well, there you go. It just came up.
So, but yeah, so traditional like main form CRM forms are one place for it. Enabling that you can kind of pick and choose which of those subgrids you want to be editable grid versus not editable grid.
Nice. Over
on the kind of main list views of an entity, so you click on account and you have your list of accounts there, that is going to be kind of either enabled or not. But
for everybody?
So the feature of editable grids can be enabled for everybody, and then on a per user basis, they can choose when they go to their list of accounts, is it an editable grid or the standard read-only grid?
Can I choose for them?
So there is a default that you can choose, but you cannot mandate once you're making the editable grid control type available, you can't restrict them from choosing that.
Oh, okay. I find my issue I have all the time, and this is, I'm sure Microsoft is really sick of me asking this question because I ask it all the time. But it's how I, as an admin, can turn off features for users I know will be overwhelmed by them. It's not so much this restrictive security, you are not allowed to use editable grids. It's, I know that you're already overwhelmed by the fact that you use a computer every day. If I give you editable grids, you're just not going to use CRM. So those are places where I hate okay, give me your password and I'm going to go set up CRM for you. I hate those scenarios. I try to avoid them, but sometimes you just kind of have to do that.
Yeah, so the fortunate thing for this particular feature is unless somebody goes looking for it, they're not going to necessarily know, hey, I can go switch this to an editable grid. The default behavior, I've enabled it in a couple of different organizations where we turn it on and people thought that the feature actually wasn't turned on because they just saw the same read-only grid that they were used to.
That's better. If I want my savvy users to have access to it, but I want my overwhelmed users to not be more overwhelmed. So if they have to go looking for it to even use it, that doesn't worry me quite so much.
Yeah, and a couple of things, that does get to a training piece of it is, how can somebody switch back and forth so that person who you want to be able to use it knows how to get it working. And the person who accidentally turned it on somehow can flip back to their read-only grid.
Or a panicked call to your personal cell phone. We've all had that call before, so that's still going to be there.
So as part of the editable grids, there are some additional capabilities that come with them that you probably want to have some training consideration around as well. One of them is a built-in grouping feature, where you can, let's use that example of looking at a list of opportunities related to an account. And as you are looking at those opportunities, maybe you want to group those based on the sales rep that they're with. So one way to do that in the old days of CRM is you click the field to sort by sales rep, and you just kind of intuitively know, keep an eye on which sales rep's name is next to each opportunity. So with this grouping feature, you can choose. There's an additional little drop down that shows up at the top of the page above the grid, is to be able to group on a field. So you could group those opportunities by their owner, and it will do kind of a little tree view style. So it'll have that salesperson's name and then all of their opportunities grouped below them. And
I've wanted that forever.
Yeah. So, and you get that. And from an admin perspective, you can choose which fields are you going to allow people to group things by. So you can protect them from themselves on some of those things that could be confusing if they try, why would I ever group something by estimated revenue? Well, you shouldn't. That's maybe if you had an estimated revenue band that you were, deals over 500K, whatever threshold you're using there, to do some of that grouping. But you do have control to keep that list simple. You can do it by sales rep or by primary contact, or, maybe there are different types of opportunities you have for products or services or whatever, and you can group based on that opportunity type.
That's awesome. For years, I've been for people exporting an advanced find view that they totally could have went and gotten themselves, or even just a standard view, and then grouped them that way manually in Excel, and then emailed them report. And if I could just have had them do it themselves in CRM, I wouldn't have had to, Excel, because it wasn't like I was doing Excel wizardry.
Come on, Britta, the report wizard has been out there for...
I'm not getting into that today. Another episode. Different co-host. No, just kidding. We'll get there. I'm excited. I want to use it. How do I know if I get to use it or not? Because maybe I have a different version of CRM than you do.
Yeah, so I'm confident if you have Dynamics 365 online or Dynamics 365 on premise that you can use editable grids. I believe that's the only place that you can use it. Maybe back in 2016 on premise.
Like the most upgraded version of 360 service packs and stuff, maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know that for sure. I've only used it in 365. So.
Got it. Yeah. So definitely not an older feature.
This is one where, as a brief, chat through history here, this has been such a long time coming. I mean, the requests for editable grids in Dynamics, it's been like that next feature that, people wanted and was supposedly coming, ever since I started working with Dynamics. It's been in the conversation. And
in the sense that people have asked for it and asked for it and asked for it, and the crowd was just kind of demanding it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is one where it is, finally here, and people are excited about it, and I'm glad we're seeing people being able to use it like this. And just as a kind of a plug for this, there is a way to be able to get feedback to Microsoft that they do actually listen to. I mean, the editable grids took forever to happen. and it was maybe one of the top requested items that went to Microsoft, but they do actually review feedback from the community, and there's a very straightforward, common place to go put that information in. So that's the Microsoft Ideas portal for Dynamics, which is just ideas.dynamics.com. It's moved from a previous place that it was. I won't mention it because I don't want to add confusion, but it is ideas.dynamics.com. And I don't know, Britta, have you ever used the Ideas portal?
I have. I don't know if I've ever submitted something. I've voted for a bunch of things. It's a great... That's the thing. Someone can submit a great idea, and having a great idea on there submitted is not what gets across the finish line. It's having a lot of support. And so don't just go on there when you have an idea for yourself. I mean, definitely if you've got an idea, go on and submit it. But please go on there just as an act of public service. Go on there and vote for other people's ideas.
Yeah.
Or if there's a really good one that you really want and you're active on Twitter or you're active on LinkedIn or something else, send the link out to people. A lot of times I will see a good one and I'll send an email to a bunch of friends and say, please go vote this up.
Yeah.
Because that's where it gets the most attention. And Microsoft really listens to customers and they want to know what customers want. And so having a bunch of customers vote up an item, that does actually shift. I can say now as an MVP, I've been in multiple conversations where they say, well, yeah, but that had really high votes. We know the customers really, really want it. So it got prioritized. So the product team does listen. But you have to vote.
Well, and most definitely use that search before you create your own. Having 10 similar things is not nearly as powerful as 10 votes for the same thing.
Exactly.
Especially when you get a scale much bigger than 10.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
the other thing that's kind of cool about the Ideas portal is there are flags that they'll put on that of when something is going to be coming. They give you an idea of, this is coming in a release that's going to be soon versus something that's planned for a distant release. And you can, as you're considering some of the different workarounds that you might be using, or you have a problem, you're submitting it to the Ideas portal and you see, it's going to be coming soon. You may use that as part of the justification for why you use your interim fix that you have, absolutely. Or ask people to just be patient and wait for the next version. I mean, obviously you have to balance that with the immediate need of the business versus being able to wait, but it does help with some real feedback from Microsoft on what is actually coming.
I did that in calculated fields. I was in finance and we just felt like we couldn't live another day without calculated fields. And it would be the first bit of custom code we had in our whole CRM. I mean, it was squeaky clean, entirely out of the box. And we were so devoted to staying out of the box, but we needed calculated fields so bad. We were just about ready to cave. And then we clung to the roadmap and we knew it was coming. And so we were able to say, okay, 6 more months. We can do 6 more months. And then we upgraded within 60 days of it going live because we were really out of the box. We knew it was coming. We clung to that roadmap and then we were okay. And I'm so glad that we did because otherwise it would have taken me a couple months to get what I needed in calculated fields in the CRM anyway. It would have paid for all that code, which I would have thrown away or been at, moral dilemma with now that I had calculated fields. So there's really so much value in knowing what the community is asking for and knowing what the community is getting. Because if you're really following along on Microsoft's publications, you can see stuff coming on the horizon, and that can shape your design decisions. You might not spend the money. You will spend the money somewhere else, and that's more valuable, I think, in almost every case, unless you just literally can't live another day without calculated fields. And they're not here yet. And, sometimes you cave and you spend the money on the
priority.
Code, absolutely. But Ideas is great. Please vote. It's not scary at all. You don't have to vouch for your credentials or pretend you understand why it would be so great or why it's so hard or why we don't have it yet. You just tick an arrow upward and it counts as your vote. And it's super easy. So please do that.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah.
Well, I think you have exhausted at least what I'm able to talk about with Editable Grids today.
Okay. I'll give you time to go back and learn it. I'll quiz you again.
All right. Sounds good.
You've been listening to Implement This with Britta Rexted and Matthew C. Anderson. Do you have a business problem you'd like us to discuss on the show? Reach us through our website, implementthis.org, where you can also subscribe to the podcast. We're on Twitter, too. Britta is at MacGyver CRM, and I'm at MC Anderson. Thanks so much for listening.